Another Iranian girl is reportedly in a coma after a run-in with the country's feared morality police. CCTV footage of the incident shows 16-year-old Armita Garawand being carried off a subway train in Tehran, her unconscious body laid on the platform. Human rights groups have said that the teenager was assaulted by morality enforcers on the train for violating Iran's strict hijab rules. Authorities deny the allegations, claiming the girl simply fainted from low blood pressure. The latest incident comes a year after the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody, which sparked mass protests across the country. The regime responded with a brutal crackdown, successfully crushing dissent. Over 500 people have been killed and more than 20,000 detained. Could the simmering resentment erupt again with the death of another girl? Or has the issue of the hijab taken a backseat to Iran's pressing economic woes? Are protests in Iran a lost cause?
All right, gentlemen, let's get to it. Are protests in Iran a lost cause? As always, we begin with a quick fire round, 30 seconds each to let your initial stance, and we take the conversation from there. So, Mr. Hosseinzadeh, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on, sir.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is the repetitive scenario of the regime regarding the human rights violation. This is one of the thousands of cases of human rights violation, specifically regarding the women in Iran, that we have been seeing for more than 40 years. And this will not be the last case, unfortunately.
Alexander Grinberg, your thoughts?
I don't think it's a lost cause, but on the other side, no regime has ever been toppled by demonstrations and protests.
All right, short and precise. Last but not least, Dr. Goldberg, your take?
I think the riots that took place last year demonstrated the regime's integral weaknesses. I think those weaknesses are still there. I think the people in charge of the morality police are habitual recidivists. This is their claim to fame. I don't know if the riots will ignite again, and I'm pretty sure that even if they do, they won't topple the regime, certainly not in the foreseeable future.
All right, gentlemen, from this point onwards, let's please feel free to interact, to engage in a conversation. So let's begin from the point that Dr. Goldberg just made, or rather the question, Mr. Hosseinzadeh, will protests be renewed?
Of course, that's for sure, because the cause of the protest is still there. The corruption, dictatorship, limits on the freedom, individual freedom, the insecurity, all are there, and until the problem is not resolved, we will see the protest in the near future, of course.
But should they be reignited? And considering what you just said in your opening remarks, Mr. Grinberg, that the regime will not be toppled by such a round of public unrest, can it, however, curb another wave of nationwide protests?
I don't think so, because first we can see some signs that people inside the regime, some regime's officers, do understand the gravity of the situation. They suggest other methods to cope with this situation. And the second thing, usually a regime may be curbed only when the elites in charge, on those who protect the regime, switch side. And this has still not happened in Iran. Maybe it will happen, but not hitherto it has not happened.
And Dr. Goldberg, this is perhaps one of the mistakes we here in the West are making, seeing the Iranian leadership as a one-size-fits-all type of an administration. But is there unity in Iran's political leadership, or the political elite and the security apparatus all on the same page?
There are grave differences between various factions within Iran's leadership, but all of these factions consider themselves loyal to the dominant paradigm, let's call it that, of the Islamic Republic. I doubt people will come out, directly against security mandates, but the discomfort felt by large parts of the leadership in Tehran when it comes to the policies of this so-called morality police have already been publicly expressed. It's very clear that the morality police is a faction, that it is not acting on the orders and instructions of the top echelons of leadership in Tehran. And again, I agree with Mr. Grinberg. The Islamic Republic is a very sophisticated affair. They have found ways of containing demonstrations and public unrest that don't necessarily have to resort to strict, overt violence in order to, quote unquote, curb them, as you said. I have no doubt that we will see another process of, I guess you could call it a kind of an illicit negotiation between the public and the leadership. I'm sure protests will erupt. I'm pretty sure they will lead to the toppling of the regime. And I'm also sure that they will create another sort of, let's call it a forced dialogue between the two sides. If I may add, I agree with Mr. Greenberg's point about the elites needing to change sides. And I'd like to add to that the fact that even during the last wave of protests, Iranian opposition has not been able to unite under a clearly defined leadership. That was an advantage at some point. It became a disadvantage at a later point because once the Islamic Republic enacts a policy of attrition, then the opposition gradually dwindles. And I think that was what happened last year. They don't have a unified leadership coming into this situation right now. I think demonstrations are likely. I don't know if they will develop into a national movement.
So, Mr. Hosseinzadeh, please,
Yeah, I just wanted to remind that we can call the politicians in the Western, countries elites, but in Iran, these are not elites. These are some kind of corrupted people that moved up in the hierarchy of the government, and they know that they are criminal, and there will be no future after the regime falls. So they know that there will be criminal court at the international level, and they will be held responsible because of their crime. And because of that, I don't see that they will change the side. They won't turn their back to the regime because they know that there will be no future for them after the fall of the regime.
So speaking to that point exactly, are Iranian rulers even interested in popular support? Can this wedge between Iranian people and the regime be mended by force, Mr. Greenberg?
They may be interested. Of course, as a human being, I cannot remain indifferent to this noble struggle of Zanz and the Ghazouti, of course. But I also know, and everyone should know, that no foreign country can forcibly impact a process in another country, even if it wants very much. There's only one way to do that, to do it militarily, but it's not an option as of now. It simply has never happened in the world, so we can. I don't understand what kind of support, except for moral support, can be granted to the people of Iran, because one can talk about, for example, preparing or teaching the leadership, but if it happens, it means intelligence preparations, which automatically endangers even more the potential leader of the protests. Once the protest has a concrete leadership, they will be at immediate risk by the regime, because the first thing that the regime will do is to try to eliminate them.
Mr. Hosseinzadeh, I see that you're in disagreement there.
I disagree, because I think the world can support more, Iranian people, because we need to consider this fact that Iranian regime is not only the problem for the Iranian people. Iranian regime is the problem for all the civilized countries and nations. So if we consider that fact, we can see that Islamic Republic poses many problems to the world, from the security wise, from the humanitarian and etc. So I'm a lawyer, and I know that there is a framework to intervention of the foreign countries to the internal affair of another country, but this is a terrorist regime. So to what extent we need to be silent regarding this criminal regime that kills its own people, that interfere in the internal affairs of another countries, and and support the terrorism and etc. So for me, there should be more support from the international community, from all aspects.
I'm afraid I share Mr. Greenberg's understanding of the world stance towards Iran, specifically and generally in historical terms. The leadership of the Islamic Republic is certainly dictatorial. It certainly harms its own citizens. It certainly abuses their human rights. But the world has demonstrated repeatedly that it has no trouble not just doing business, but entering into meaningful partnerships with regimes that do all of that and more. The Saudi regime comes to mind, does exactly what the Iranian regime does, according to Mr. Hosseinzadeh's words. So I doubt an international criminal court will be established, even if the regime is toppled. And frankly, right now in the Middle East, Iran is looking more and more like a potential partner for all sorts of processes throughout the region. I think the Supreme Leader just said this yesterday or the day before when he attempted to convince the Saudis in a public speech that gambling and normalization with Israel is, in his words, backing the wrong horse. Iran is making a significant effort to look like a responsible adult, and I don't think it is lacking for potential partners in that respect. So I'm afraid that too harms any potential readiness the world might have to intervene in Iran, even when such horrible things happen as a result of the regime's actions.
All right, Mr. Grinberg, in the short time we have left before we take a break, wrap it up for us.
Of course, what I say, it does not mean indifference. Of course, I think me and Mr. Goldberg, we do identify and express solidarity with the plight of the Iranian people. And no doubt that this is a regime but we also understand simply on the basis of our knowledge that no international support can change it. Okay, so if we shout all together across the worldwide, the regime is bad, I don't think it will change.
Yeah, the limitations
and of course, the recent revelations about the pro-Iranian lobby in America didn't spark any uproar.
Gentlemen, we'll put us up right here and get back to that right after the break. Do not go anywhere. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Alexander Grinberg, Dr. Ori Goldberg, and Ehsan Hosseinzadeh. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, of course, but before we get back to our conversation, Western sanctions on Iran continue, but even if taking a certain toll on the economy, are they leading to any change in policy? This is what Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi had to say at the UN General Assembly short weeks ago.
These sanctions have had no effect on our nation's decisiveness in the country's progress. It is time for the US to end its decision-making crisis and choose the right path.
All right, gentlemen, another quick fire round, 30 seconds each, and we take it from there. Is the Western sanction regime working, or is it all mere lip service, so to speak? Mr. Grinberg, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
The sanctions regime doesn't work, and again, as there is no country in the world whose politics was alternated as a result of the sanctions. Yet it does not mean that the sanctions should not be imposed.
Right. Dr. Goldberg, your thoughts?
I agree. The sanctions don't work. I do think the sanctions should not be imposed at the level they are currently imposed. I think they are too sweeping and too broad and don't enable constructive dialogue with the leadership in Tehran. I think the international community has to make up its mind whether it wants to force Tehran's hand or wants to enter into a beneficial partnership at some level with the regime. I don't think it's made up its mind, therefore the sanctions don't work.
Mr. Hosseinzadeh, your take?
Uh, uh, I don't know. The sanction has weakened the regime, but also it's weakened the Iranian people.
Right.
So it has the worst, impact on economy of Iran. It raised the level of corruption. It raised the level of unsatisfactory and insatisfaction of Iranian people. But the regime is still in the power.
Dr. Goldberg, and gentlemen, let's feel free to interact once again. Dr. Goldberg, should Western diplomacy vis-a-vis Iran be separated from its domestic affairs?
Oh, I don't think Western diplomacy has any potential to affect Iran's domestic affairs. I think any attempts to steer diplomatic efforts towards either regime change or meddling in internal Iranian affairs is a sure recipe for failure. I think responsible diplomacy is engaging diplomacy. I think there are certainly signs that players in the region are looking at Iran in a somewhat new light. The horrible events like what happened to this woman in Tehran, they are horrible. They certainly create a lot of sympathy and solidarity, certainly with the plight of Iranian women, with the plight of Iranian citizens, but they are far detached from ongoing diplomatic efforts.
Mr. Grinberg, I wouldn't say going back to domestic Iranian affairs, because obviously it affects global affairs as well, but is there an alternative to the current regime?
Is there, sorry, I didn't hear well.
An alternative. Is there an alternative to the current regime?
I don't think there is any alternative, and again, only Iranians inside Iran can decide what the alternative to the regime will be. It is not something, and it can never be anything that someone outside of Iran can decide or suggest. When Iranian people decide that they are fed up and they decide to topple this regime, they will topple it. But it cannot be anticipated from above from any other foreign country.
Mr. Hosseinzadeh, is there an in-between, in the sense that a situation in which the regime can maintain its character while making some concessions? Can it be more flexible, or is what we see is what we get? Is that what it is?
This question is like asking the question: would the Nazi regime be reformable if we didn't attack Hitler? This is exactly the same case. We are facing a regime that killed its own people inside of the country, that expanded the terrorism outside of its border, international border. Then it wants to acquire the nuclear bomb, wants to eradicate Israel, and it shout every day death to America, Israel, and etc., etc. So this is a fascist regime, terrorist regime. That let's be very clear with you. I'm Iranian. I've lived there for 31 years. Yeah. And I know this, that Iranian regime will not fall without military intervention. It's like saying that Hitler or Nazi regime would fall with the protests. It's exactly the same scenario.
Dr. Goldberg.
Again, I'm afraid that's not my understanding of the situation. Not to detract in any way from the dictatorial aspects of the Iranian regime. And again, without even talking about the specific faults of the Iranian regime, the West does business, the international community does business on a daily basis with regimes that are just as bad, even ones that are located in the Middle East. Killing one's own people, supporting terrorism, calling for the death of various other global actors, even though that part has been somewhat downplayed. Those don't amount to an inexcusable offense against the mores of the international community. I agree with Mr. Grinberg wholeheartedly. I think only Iranians inside Iran can topple the regime. I don't think they are capable at the moment of doing so. They lack leadership, they lack organizational focus, and I don't think the world will intervene. I'll add that I think the world actually looks to the Iranian regime right now as, and this might sound strange, but I still think it's true, potentially stabilizing actor in various Middle Eastern contexts. And the world doesn't end with Washington, D.C. or the General Assembly. The world includes China and India and other major players. They are not averse to a partnership with the Islamic Republic.
Ehsan, once again, I'm looking at you, listening to Dr. Goldberg. I believe you beg to differ.
Yeah, with all due respect, I think I disagree, because we are facing a regime that does not respect any legal, does not respect any international laws, does not respect any international convention, and it kills its own people. In 2019, they killed 1,500 people in 3 days. In the recent protests, they killed more than 500 people. They tortured the people. So how these people can defeat this kind of brutal regime that kills its own people and had a militia in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, etc., etc.
Alexander,
I don't see they can overcome this regime with bare hands and with no support from Western countries.
Alexander Grinberg, unfortunately, we're nearing the end of our discussion. Bottom line, a bit over a year since the Mahsa Amini death, and now this new incident with another young girl being assaulted by the morality police. Is the regime stronger or weaker at this point in time?
I think it's neither this nor that. The regime is, I would say, the regime managed to survive exactly due to its internal capacity of adaptation. It is a regime that, since the inception, that can contain some divergences of opinion within the red lines of the regime. So it managed to survive. So it's surviving. I don't. Maybe it will fall in a year or in a decade. But I'm not a prophet to foretell that.
Hey, I see you liked it. Want more? Just hit the subscribe button right here. Go on. I know you want to.